Hey everyone. First, it has been awesome learning from everyone so far. And I really want to approach this with an open mind because this is going to be different than probably a lot of our traditional attitudes towards programmatic media buying. I'm also really excited for Manny's presentation. I know I'm going to learn a lot from it. So I manage programmatic media across 5 different brands at TechStyle, but first we have to establish what is TechStyle. Then we're actually going to go into what is our programmatic goal. There's obviously different companies have different goals for what they're trying to accomplish with every single ad they serve. So we have to establish what our goal is. 2 evaluating factors. So these are the 2 things that we look at when we decide whether to go forward with a test or whether something is working well or not. Oops. So all of this results in our programmatic launch strategy. So how do we actually go about buying ads? And then when we're analyzing those results, what do we decide is a win or a loss? A general reminder that we all know, programmatic is really complex, but in some ways we're going to be challenging that assumption. So first, little question. I'm not going to make you raise your hands because you're probably tired from clapping so much, but 4 different options on what TechStyle actually is. 4 very different options. It is actually C. So it is a bunch of e-commerce brands, specifically these e-commerce brands. So Fabletics, which is Kate Hudson, Just Fab, Shoe Dazzle, which was Kim Kardashian, Fab Kids, and then Savage X Fenty, which is Rihanna. We're 9 years old, 5 separate companies, 10 different countries, 5 million members in total. Our shoes and apparel, that is a lot of different things at different companies. So at Fabletics, that's mostly leggings, etc. But if we look at what Fab Kids is selling or Savage X Fenty, it's lingerie. It's quite different. And we're going to hit $1 billion in sales in 2020. So thinking through a decade of growth, that's a pretty quick run rate. So this GIF, there's no point to it. I just think it's cool. I like it. I put it on my presentations. So what about the actual team structure for how we go about structuring our organization? Because we're quite different. So instead of working with agencies, we actually work with partners directly. So this is approximately 66% of our team. Basically, we are an in-house media agency based across 3 different locations, LA, San Francisco, and Barcelona. We have separate creative teams that sit within for each of those brands within our media team to execute the buys, do the creatives, etc. So we can share learnings, but also focus on the brand as needed. So what is our goal? There's obviously lots of different metrics that we could optimize to, but there's really only one thing that we know is our true North Star of what works and what doesn't, and that is cost per acquisition. So we've done all of the work since we're a subscription model to understand it is the lifetime value of how long somebody stays with us as a brand. So knowing that, it gives us a ton of freedom to focus on that lower funnel conversion metric, which is very freeing as an advertiser. So what do we value? What are the things that we actually say this is good or this is bad when we're looking at a new test? And these are going to be really basic. First one is time. I am very selfish with my time. So in the short term, how many calls are we going to have? How many emails, etc.? How many ad groups could I build in the process of building one? This is data that we can track and understand what we're actually getting from that buy. And then long term, if you're running a test that takes a year to get the data, that's a year. A lot changes, right? So the data that you accumulated 10 months ago, is it good? Is it bad? How do you react to it, etc.? It's a pretty tough task to tell your CMO, hey, we're still waiting, etc. So we have to think through the long-term time as well. So the depth of data. It's always frustrating when you're setting up an ad group, you're wasting your time on something that's only going to yield the picture on the right. You're going to have 2 semi-equal parts. It's bad data. You're really only answering this one test. Obviously, we have to be mindful of crossing variables, etc. But compared on the left, the same amount of time, we're going to be able to get a lot more data and possibly find pockets of efficiency. So trying to do something slowly is not really in our DNA. We try and do it as quickly as possible so we can get the next test up and running. So when it actually comes to our buying strategy, how are we going about setting up any sort of test? How do we approach any new vendor? Anything of that nature. This is the main thing that we try and debunk with our testing strategy. So instead of going through and having a wishy-washy kind of, oh, we'll get approval from this group, or we'll not have a certain amount of budget set, we have everything very clearly defined through literally 100% breakdown of 20% of our time is going to go towards this, 50% is going to go towards this, and then 30% is going to go to the remainder, and that leads to our testing framework. So it doesn't matter whether it's a set of ads or it's a new DSP. We go through and do this exact same methodology every single time. And it seems really simple, but we're going to walk through it like it's kind of complex. So stage one, we're collecting data. This is purely just letting the broadest scope of the campaign, inventory, whatever, run so we can get as many signals in the door. But we're not going to be spending a ton of money because we are held to a CPA goal. Basically, we're getting those data signals brought in, so then we can scale up and give our auto-op tools, et cetera, all of the ability they need to go in and find better inventory in stage two. CPAs will rise, but we try not to panic. And then stage three, we actually go through and aggressively cut all of the bad inventory. So we've spent the first 70% of this time, just spending and kind of letting things go. We're not really that concerned about what is going on in terms of performance as we enter stage three. We want to, at the end of stage three, look and see if this is a good number for us. Once we make that decision, we have two options. Either we're going to turn off that test, et cetera, and we're going to move on and find something else, or we're going to lean in and divide into additional ad groups, et cetera. Segmentation. How do we take that one ad group and turn it into 10 is the goal. So where has this led us? So year over year, using this testing strategy, Programmatic has grown to be our second largest channel, 70% year over year growth while being 35% more efficient. We've done this by having a lot more ad groups with less spend per ad group because they're that much more targeted. And a lot of it is benefits in terms of technology. Programmatic has finally gotten to the space where those targeted ad groups actually perform somewhat like they should. So data, we have drastically increased the amount we're spending on data, but we're spending less per segment. So what we noticed was we were paying for premium data, but it wasn't getting us premium results. And once we changed that, we're able to find new data partners, better data segments, and use that to our advantage. Auto-opt, so we previously were big believers in manual optimization. We're a small team, but we were always doing it ourselves, going through cutting out the bad inventory, et cetera. And after a bunch of really robust tests using that testing framework, we determined that auto-opt had finally caught up, shout out to the trade desk, for what we were seeing in terms of performance. And this is what has led for that ad group segmentation. It's given us time for the data partners. In the final product of all this, we're constantly testing. So we can have 6 different tests going on at once, et cetera. We're never at a shortage for new ideas to keep increasing spend while cutting out that bad inventory to get a better CPA. That's the only thing that we get evaluated on, but at the same time, we have tons of freedom within our programmatic space to get to that CPA, long as we follow this testing framework. So that's how we buy media at TechStyle. Any questions? I'd love to answer them. Dan.
Considering I'm the one that started TechStyle, I feel that I...
That's a very true statement, by the way.
Do you track ad sizes?
Yeah, so so actually one of the big changes that we made was what creative sizes are we asking for from our creative team. So obviously resources are limited across the 5 brands, et cetera. So if we test 300 by 250, 320 by 50, 728 by 90, it gets us enough traffic in the door quickly, it gets us a good CPA, and it gets us a desktop-mobile mix. But at the same time, we're always requesting those additional ad formats once we find top performers.
Hi, Jarod. Ahmed from Active.
Sorry.
So when you are splitting the one ad group into 10 ad groups, are you changing anything from the creative standpoint to accommodate for each ad group, or is it just simply adjusting bid prices and how much you want allocated?
So if I had to name the thing that TechStyle Programmatic could do a better job at, it would be creative. We do not have a DCO solution. We run the same creatives throughout most of the funnel. There's a slight difference maybe once you abandon your cart or something. But for the most part, it's the same creative. It's purely what data differentiation. So if we see a certain DMA that's performing exceedingly well, that's going to be one of those 10 ad groups. Would I like to have a special creative for that ad group? Yes, but at the same time, I would rather have a better performing creative that I can use in all of my ad groups. And I only have so many creative asks.
Good morning, Alberto, AKQA. I see that you're doing some analysis, and then I see a weight then evaluate, which is awesome. Can you speak a little bit to the amount of time you're actually waiting or taking into account for proper analysis?
So I love that question. So we can change the amount of time that we put into the testing framework based on how much data that we're collecting and how serious we are about the initiative. So if it's a 1-month test where we're basically testing a new inventory type, we're going to let at least the same amount of time go by that we were running the test in terms of really decide, because the conversions keep coming through afterwards, et cetera. So we want to understand the full value of every dollar we spent. If we're testing creatives, we're doing it all the time on the fly. We're not going to wait. It's like the day of is the day of.
Hi, I hope this is not a stupid question and I'm not the only one that has it, but what is auto opt?
So shame on me for not putting a better explanation up there. So normally we were going through and bid factoring individually based on whatever grain. Now we can tell the DSP to go through and make those adjustments for us. We're actually even doing a little bit of using some Python, plugging into an API and trying to control our bids that way. That's different than auto-op, but in the same way, we're still creating a set of rules that make the optimizations for us, which saves a ton of time.
Jarod, this is great. Let's get Manny up here to compare and contrast. Thanks, Jarod. Manny? All right. As I said, Manny's been doing this for a number of years across several agencies, now at Essence Digital, before that at Digitas and at Neil at Ogilvy. Please welcome Manny Hernandez.
Hey guys, thank you very much. Given the composition of who is in this room, I decided to take the presentation up just a little bit, a level up. I decided to kind of focus on, well, let me explain it this way. How we buy is an expression of how we plan. So I wanted to give you guys, the people in this room, an insight into how that happens at Essence and what that decision-making process looks like so that you have a better understanding of how to work with us and how you might potentially end up on a plan. So in order to get there, I'm going to need you to bear with me through like 3 slides that are a little bit of an eyeful, if they come up. Are you able to advance? Oh, thanks. Gotcha, thank you. So this is the structure at Essence, and the first thing you're going to notice about it is it's highly matrixed. The way I would break this down is to think about it as a Venn diagram, with that brown box being client service, and then agency operations is the gray box. And the intersection of that are all the doers, the people that are actually engaged in activity day to day that's going to eventually bring a campaign to life. So I just make that clarification to not insult my CS partners and my agency operations people, because they're definitely important and they're in a support role. But everything you see in green are the people that are doing something that's going to eventually lead to a campaign. For this talk, what we're going to focus on is the media piece of it, and specifically media planning and activation, because that tends to confuse people a little bit about how Essence operates. So how I'd explain it is Essence, we're big on going deep in terms of vertical and platform expertise and channel expertise. And that's something a lot of agencies struggle with. I think what you've seen over the years is you've seen the holding companies try and get that expertise by consolidating everyone into their trading desks. And then we saw them move away from that and try and kind of spread out that expertise and interject them into the actual media teams, and it tends to get watered down. So we're in a dilemma where the question becomes, do you go wide or do you go deep? And Essence approach to that has been this matrix approach, which is we're going to try and go deep, but we're going to make sure that there's glue there connecting all the dots. So the role of media planning is really to be that glue, while media activation, which is a department I head up, are the channel experts. That'll become important in just a couple slides. But media activation is also broken out into 3 different areas. You have display activation, you have social activation, and then you have search activation. So we have a challenge in that we don't want to be like other agencies where you're planning these things in a silo, and then at the end of the day, you staple together 3 channel plans that are somewhat disconnected. And again, that's the role of media planning, to kind of brief us, make sure that there's a holistic audience strategy, and all those things are coming together. So digging into media activation, and specifically display, because that's what I oversee, I want to tell you a little bit about how we approach it. So when I started out as a media planner, this was the typical campaign lifecycle. You've all seen it. This was a really great way to work. This process played out over 3 months over the quarter. We got briefed, we did our research and insights, you'd launch the campaign, maybe midway campaign, you did some reallocations, at the end of the campaign, you report. What programmatic and the visibility that comes with it has given us is this cycle repeated a heck of a lot faster. And I know you guys all feel it, I feel it. But that allows us certain opportunities, and that's why Essence is structured in that complex way, because we try and tackle it this way. I'm just showing you guys a piece that really relates to what media activation does, but we have these workflows and diagrams for every one of the disciplines that you see listed on the left side there. But the really important thing from activation is between the 2 red pyramids there. And that's the handoff between the media activation packet and then when we actually deliver a tactical plan to the planning team for them to do holistic evaluation across all the channels and make sure that we're paying off what the client brief was. The activation packet is essentially, it's like a heavy-duty brief. It's everything that we got from the client, but then they layer in their own insights, their own research, things that they know from historical campaigns, to make sure we're coming up with the best channel-specific plans that we can, and that there's unity across channels. Cool. So that's the general approach, and the reason I wanted to start with that is because typically I think when you guys approach agencies, you want to go to the planning teams, and you think they're the ones making the partner decisions, and that the activation people are the ones who are just setting stuff up, and they're kind of the task monkeys, which is half true. We are. But at Essence, we are also the ones that are making partner and tactical level decisions. So I wanted to clarify that before I walk you guys through the actual decision framework and how we think about putting plans together. Okay, so on to actual partner evaluations. It really comes down to 2 fundamental questions. Is there a unique value proposition? And if there is, do we want to execute that through a reservation buy or through programmatic? We think about that from 4 specific lenses. The first point, the value proposition. We look at things from an inventory perspective, a data perspective, a tech perspective, or creative. Those are really the 4 ways where we would see someone adding some type of unique value that we can't do ourselves through a programmatic stack. We do scorecards that give proper weighting because there's no one-size-fits-all. Every objective, every client, they have their nuances, their preferences, their quirks, whatever it is, and we have to weight those things. But these are the categories where we're looking for unique differentiation, and these are also kind of the things that tend to drive our strategic roadmaps longer term. So it's good to, when you're talking to us, approach it from that frame of mind. The next decision that has to be made is whether to go programmatic or reservation. There's a series of questions. These are not necessarily in order, but our preference tends to be programmatic. Essence is very audience-focused. We believe in the technology, we believe in the stack, and we think it's very important to get a consolidated view so that we can make sure we're adding incremental value. And we have a big focus on incrementality when the client's objectives align to that. So how we think about it is there's a series of questions, and the assumption is if we can say yes to all of these and we can run programmatic, we're going to do it. If there's a reason not to, then we'll run reservation. But those questions at the top are just some samples of how we think about it. The one other thing I wanted to say about this is that there are, of course, always other considerations. It's not necessarily just these two things that you have to think about. So you might have historical top performers. There might be client requests where they really like something, or this is a big one in entertainment. They want to see their ads in specific spots around town. Things like that get taken into consideration. We have to set aside pieces of budget for testing so that our plans don't get stale. And then there's JBPs and big partnerships, things like that have to be taken into consideration, and opportunities for testing and doing new high-impact things. So those are all ways that we start to plug in our activation mindset and the programmatic first approach. But that's kind of the gist of it. And not to totally abandon the point of this, I know the description got into how do you structure ad groups and things like that, so I'll just encapsulate that in one sentence. We structure our ad groups based on reporting needs, budget mandates, or any kind of optimization or testing requirements, and it's really that simple. So wanted to throw that out as well. But I will take any questions.
Manny, thank you very much. Jarod, why don't you go up? We'll throw questions at both of you if you guys have any. Back here.
Hi, Wan Chen from AARP. You had mentioned the importance of incrementality. What were some of the approaches you take when you're measuring various platforms for incrementality?
Yeah. Well, at Essence, we actually have a proprietary tool called Scrutineer. So that's one of the requirements that a lot of our tech partners have been asked to integrate with. It's specific to brand right now, but we do develop a similar we're in the process of developing a similar solution for DR campaigns. But we're really looking at the lift, did the activity we did drive incremental value that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise?
We divide our funnel into various parts and then spend probably $50,000 a year on Red Cross ads. And it's a lot of money to quote unquote waste, but it gives us the confidence to spend.
Jarod, how does video fit into that framework that you were talking about? Is it the same, or does it change any aspect of that framework?
It's the exact same. So actually, video was probably the first place that we really tested it out, and it gave us the confidence internally to have higher CPMs because we were, in theory, being robust about how we treated data and how we thought about the results. So it has actually cut down on the level of buy-in, et cetera. So when we want to test a new thing, we just do it. There's no conversation with executives or anything. It's just testing because we have those guardrails in place.
To underscore the thing almost always involves creative. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how much you're using different types of creative and how you're managing the demands on creative to satisfy all this testing?
So we are always limited by the amount of creatives that we can get, and our creative team still deserves a huge shout out. They do an amazing job. So when we think about testing framework, what can we identify in a creative to make it data? So if there's a part of color can be broken down and tracked. What is actually in the ad? So is it showing leggings? Is it showing a bra? Is it showing shoes, et cetera? Those are all things that we track as data and then pass that through as a creative request back to our internal teams.
Manny, you would have a different challenge when it comes to creative because you've got, for each account, you would have varying degrees of reliance on internal versus brand. How are you handling all of the demands that programmatic, or the opportunity that programmatic offers for dynamic content creation, for all the different content possibilities you can use?
Yeah, it gets a little bit tricky because each client is at a different place. And the thing I would say is that tends to be a second priority after getting an audience strategy up and running and in place, because you can't really execute a good creative or personalization strategy if you haven't got the foundation set. So I'd say that's step one. But step two is we tend to notice people starting to move into like wanting to do things like DCO or personalization. And it really just depends on what the client's resource is. Some are really leaning heavily into it. Some are not so much. But I would say what a baseline is there's usually an easy win is usually alignment between retargeting and looking at like on-site behaviors and figuring out what message to show, how often to show it, and when do you start like working your way back up a funnel if what you're doing isn't working. That's kind of a baseline that I notice, and then they get more advanced from there.
And, oh, go ahead.
Oh, hi, this is Terry from TrustX. Manny, I wanted to understand how you approach quality when you buy at Essence. I've read a little bit about your QCPM, and I just wanted to get a sense of that if certain customers who really value quality, does that differ in your approach?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's actually become a big focus over probably the last year and a half, 2 years for almost all the clients. They're really scrutinizing what they're getting, and to Evan's point yesterday, weighing out what's the value of what we know to be right, you know, at a gut feel versus what the reporting says. And it's really interesting. So the way that we tackle that is all of the clients, you know, we're looking at fraud, we're looking at viewability, we're looking at it at a somewhat in a directional way, unless they have stricter guidelines that they're mandating. But I think the idea behind looking at it directionally is it's a canary in a coal mine. You know what I mean? If you're seeing bad stuff there, you know you have to adjust something, but you shouldn't be chasing that metric, because that's going to lead you to make bad decisions, you know, just based off reporting. But what we're pretty much looking for is quality supply at a price that backs into an efficient CPA.
Jarod, I was going to ask, sort of draft off to that, Jarod, where things like fraud, quality, viewability fit into that matrix as well. But would you also address that question of what constitutes quality for you guys?
So that's why we waste all the money on Red Cross ads. I would love to know how much money the Red Cross has actually raised, because obviously these ads click out to a donation page at the Red Cross, et cetera. But fraud, viewability, et cetera, when we know that we're serving ads that are driving a certain number of conversions, and we can say prospecting versus video versus site retargeting, et cetera, that gives us the confidence to know that enough of our ads are showing up in the right places to drive the desired impact. You know, sure, on record, we're definitely buying some fraudulent traffic at our CPMs, well aware, but we buy so much good traffic, I stand by the Red Cross incrementality attribution solution we have.
Yeah, it's an imperfect ecosystem, right? So we may not get to zero, but our goal is to do the best we can in the environment we can so that we're making the strongest decisions and getting the most results out of the budget that we're putting into the market.
Manny, Jarod, really interesting. Thanks for popping the hood on both of your operations. Thanks so much, guys. And we're going to do this.